Clara Whitmore was 28 years old when her neighbors decided her decision to brick up the woodshed proved she'd finally lost her mind to grief. It was September 1887 in the Montana Territory near Helena, and the frontier community had watched Clara descend into what they considered madness since her husband's death 6 months earlier. Clara's husband, David Whitmore, had died in March 1887 from pneumonia that had started as a simple cold and progressed rapidly. He'd been 32, married to Clara for 6 years, with plans to expand their homestead and maybe start a family. The pneumonia killed him in 9 days. Clara had buried him on the hillside above their cabin and faced her first winter alone. The cabin David had built was standard Montana Territory construction. Log walls, single room 16 feet by 20 feet, small loft for storage, conventional stone fireplace in one wall. Attached to the cabin's north side was a woodshed, an 8 by 12 structure where they'd stored firewood for winter. The woodshed shared one wall with the cabin, providing some insulation and convenient access to fuel. Through spring and summer 1887, Clara had worked the homestead alone, maintaining the garden, caring for chickens, cutting hay. The physical labor helped numb the grief, but she also spent hours studying the cabin's heating system and understanding why David had always struggled to keep them warm through Montana winters despite burning wood continuously. The conventional fireplace was fundamentally inefficient. Wood would burn at high temperature, perhaps 1400 degrees Fahrenheit at peak combustion, but most of that heat went straight up the chimney as hot exhaust gases. Maybe 15 to 25% of the heat energy actually warmed the cabin. The rest was waste. Clara had read books on thermodynamics and masonry heating that David had ordered years earlier but never implemented. The books described European masonry heaters, massive structures built from brick or stone that captured exhaust heat in long internal passages before allowing smoke to exit. The masonry mass would absorb heat during a short hot fire, then radiate that heat slowly for 12 to 24 hours. The principle was elegant. Instead of continuous low-efficiency burning, you'd have one short, high-efficiency burn that heated enormous thermal mass. The mass then became your heat source for the entire day and night. One small fire could heat a space for 24 hours if the thermal mass was large enough and properly designed. Clara realized the woodshed attached to her cabin could become that thermal mass. The structure was already there, 8 feet by 12 feet, 10 feet high. If she filled the interior with masonry material, creating massive thermal battery, and built a combustion chamber that fed heat into that mass, she could heat the entire cabin from one tiny fire daily. But it would require bricking up the woodshed, literally filling it with brick, stone, and cob material until it was no longer empty storage, but solid thermal mass. Everyone would think she'd destroyed valuable storage space for insanity. But Clara had done the mathematics and believed it would work. Her design was based on principles she'd studied. Build a small combustion chamber where wood would burn at extreme temperature with complete combustion. Channel the exhaust through long passages inside the massive thermal battery. The masonry would absorb heat as exhaust cooled. Eventually, exhaust would exit through chimney at near ambient temperature, meaning virtually all heat had been transferred to the mass instead of wasted up chimney. With her grief-driven determination and $30 saved from selling eggs and butter, Clara began the transformation in early September. The first step was removing the woodshed's roof and one wall, creating access to build inside. She'd salvage and reuse the lumber later. Neighbors passing by saw her dismantling the woodshed and assumed grief had broken her completely. Inside the now open woodshed space, she built the combustion chamber, a small firebox only 18 inches wide, 12 inches deep, 18 inches high. Built from fire brick arranged to create an insulated chamber where wood would burn at maximum temperature. The small size was intentional, forced complete combustion of small amounts of fuel, achieving temperatures above 1200 degrees, where wood burns cleanly with minimal smoke. Above the combustion chamber, she built what she called the heat riser, a vertical insulated chimney 8 inches diameter, 4 feet tall. The exhaust from the hot burn would rise through this chimney, creating strong draft while maintaining high temperature. At the top of the heat riser, the exhaust would enter a 55-gallon steel drum she'd acquired from a Helena merchant. The drum would act as heat exchanger, the hottest exhaust hitting the metal, radiating heat outward. From the barrel, exhaust would enter the thermal mass system. She'd excavated a trench around the inside perimeter of the woodshed footprint, created a channel along all 4 walls, approximately 18 inches wide, descending below grade. This channel would contain the exhaust pathway. She lined the channel with stones, creating a passage roughly 8 inches in diameter that ran the entire perimeter, approximately 40 feet of exhaust pathway. The channel sloped gently downward, allowing exhaust to flow through gravity and cooling as it transferred heat to surrounding mass. Then began the massive work of filling the woodshed structure with thermal mass material, work that would consume 6 weeks of brutal physical labor and test Clara's endurance beyond anything she'd experienced. She mixed cob using the traditional ratio, 3 parts clay, 1 part sand, 1 part chopped straw by volume. The clay came from a deposit she'd found 200 yards from the cabin, grey-blue clay that dried hard and strong. The sand she purchased in Helena, 10 wagon loads at $2 per load. The straw came from her own hay meadow, chopped to 3-inch lengths. The mixing process was exhausting. She'd spread clay on the ground, add sand and straw, add water, then stomp it with bare feet for 30 to 45 minutes until thoroughly mixed. Each batch produced roughly 2 cubic feet of cob, approximately 240 pounds of wet material. To fill 768 cubic feet required approximately 384 batches. Each batch took 2 hours from start to placement, mixing, transporting in buckets, packing into the structure. That meant 768 hours of labor compressed into 6 weeks of dawn to dusk work. Her feet cracked and bled from stomping clay. Her back developed constant ache from the bending and lifting. Her hands became so calloused they looked like leather. She lost perhaps 15 pounds from her already thin frame, burning calories faster than she could consume them. The layering technique was critical. She couldn't simply dump wet cob into the space. It would never dry properly and would develop cracks that would compromise the thermal mass integrity. Instead, she built it layer by layer, each layer perhaps 6 inches thick. She'd pack a 6-inch layer around the perimeter, let it dry for 2 to 3 days until firm enough to support the next layer, then repeat. The drying was complicated by Montana's cool autumn weather. In warm weather, cob dries in days. In 50-degree October temperatures, layers took 3 to 4 days to firm adequately. She had to balance speed against proper curing. Work too fast, and the structure would fail. Work too slow, and winter would arrive before completion. The internal channels containing the stone-lined exhaust pathway had to remain open during the cob packing. She'd built temporary wooden forms inside the channels to prevent cob from filling them. As she built up layers, she'd extend the forms upward, maintaining the 8-inch diameter passages that exhaust would flow through. By mid-October, the structure was perhaps 4 feet high, halfway complete. Neighbors passing by would see Clara covered in mud, stomping clay barefoot despite October cold, packing material into the mysterious structure. The sight confirmed their belief that grief had broken her mind. The volume of material was staggering to comprehend. 768 cubic feet of cob at 120 pounds per cubic foot equaled approximately 92,000 pounds, 46 tons of clay, sand, and straw. Clara had mixed, transported, and placed every pound of it working alone over 6 weeks. By early November, the structure reached its final 8-foot height. The top layers were particularly challenging. She had to build scaffolding to reach the upper areas, carrying buckets of cob up a ladder, working at height while exhausted. Several times she nearly fell from fatigue-induced carelessness. The 55-gallon steel drum that would act as heat exchanger was embedded in the cob near the top, positioned so the hottest exhaust from the heat riser would enter it. The drum's exterior would radiate heat outward into the surrounding cob. She packed cob carefully around the drum, leaving only the bottom open where exhaust entered and a chimney exit at the top. The final details were precise work. She plastered the exterior surfaces smooth, added a final layer of fine clay plaster that would protect the cob from weather and provide finished appearance. She built a small roof over the structure to shed rain. She carefully removed the temporary forms from inside the exhaust channels, leaving clean 8-inch passages throughout the 40-foot pathway. By mid-November, 2 months after starting, the structure was complete. She'd transformed an empty 8x12 woodshed into a 46-ton thermal battery with internal combustion chamber and exhaust heat recovery system. The physical and mental toll had been extraordinary, but the structure stood solid and ready for testing. By early November, the structure was complete. The former woodshed was now a massive cob structure, solid thermal battery with internal exhaust channels. Only 3 features were visible from outside: the small combustion chamber feeding door at ground level, the 55-gallon barrel protruding near the top, and a chimney exiting through what had been the woodshed roof. She'd rebuilt a simple roof over the structure to protect the cob from rain. From outside, it looked like she'd bricked up the woodshed into an enormous, mysterious monolith attached to her cabin. The community's reaction was exactly what she'd expected. Martha Jensen, wife of a successful Helena merchant and leader of local women's society, organized an intervention in mid-November. 6 women came to convince Clara to accept help before winter killed her. They stood outside Clara's cabin, looking at the massive cob structure where the woodshed had been. The structure dominated the view, 8 by 12 feet, 8 feet high, approximately 46 tons of clay and stone, where there had been simple wood storage. "Clara!" Martha called toward the cabin door. "We're here out of concern. You've destroyed your woodshed. You have no place to store firewood for winter. That structure you've built makes no sense to any of us. Please accept help before you freeze. The Henderson family has room for a boarder." Clara emerged from the cabin, 28 years old, thin from months of grief and labor, hands scarred from building. She invited the women inside to explain the system. The cabin's conventional fireplace had been sealed. Clara had bricked up the firebox opening, eliminating the old, inefficient system. The only heat source was the new combustion chamber accessible from outside. The conventional fireplace wasted 80% of heat up the chimney, Clara explained. "I've built a system that captures that waste heat in thermal mass. One small fire heats 46 tons of material. That mass releases heat slowly for 24 hours. I'll burn less wood total and stay warmer than conventional burning. You're going to heat a 16 by 20 cabin in Montana winter by burning wood outside in that structure?" Martha asked skeptically. "Heat has to come inside, Clara. Your plan is to heat the outside of your cabin and hope some comes through the wall? That's not how heating works." "The thermal mass shares a wall with the cabin," Clara explained patiently. 8 feet by 8 feet of shared wall. That wall will be heated to perhaps 120 degrees from the thermal mass behind it. The wall radiates heat into the cabin. Additionally, I've created a small vent that allows some warm air from the barrel space to enter the cabin directly." The women couldn't deny that the shared wall felt noticeably warm to touch. The first test burns had proven heat transfer worked, but they remained skeptical that it would be adequate for Montana winter. "One handful of firewood?" Sarah Mitchell asked, examining the tiny combustion chamber. "This firebox is barely a cubic foot. You're saying you'll heat your cabin all winter by burning fire in a box the size of a bread box? High-efficiency combustion, Clara explained. The small chamber forces complete burning at extreme temperature. Wood releases 8,000 BTU per pound when burned completely. Conventional fireplaces achieve only 2,000 BTU per pound because combustion is incomplete and most heat escapes. My system captures nearly all the heat in the thermal mass. The women left unconvinced, certain Clara would be dead by January. Through late November and December, Clara's system proved revolutionary in ways that defied conventional understanding of heating. She developed a routine. Each morning, she'd load the combustion chamber with approximately 5 pounds of small wood pieces, sticks perhaps 1 inch diameter, 6 to 12 inches long, 1 armful, 1 handful compared to the half-cord daily that conventional fireplaces consumed. She'd light the fire and close the chamber door partially, controlling air intake to achieve optimal combustion. The fire would burn intensely hot for 30 to 45 minutes. The small chamber and controlled air creating conditions where wood burned at 1200 to 1400 degrees with complete combustion. Minimal smoke, maximum heat. The exhaust from this intense burn would rise through the heat riser, hit the steel barrel radiating heat outward, then descend through the 40 feet of stone channels embedded in the cob mass. By the time exhaust reached the final chimney, it had cooled to perhaps 150 degrees, meaning virtually all heat had been transferred to the thermal mass. The 46 tons of cob would absorb the heat. The mass temperature would rise gradually during the burn and for an hour afterward, as heat distributed through the material. The shared wall with the cabin, 8 feet by 8 feet of cob, would reach perhaps 120 to 130 degrees at the surface. That heated wall would radiate warmth into the cabin continuously for the next 24 hours. As the mass slowly cooled from 130 degrees toward ambient, it released the stored energy. The cabin would maintain 60 to 65 degrees through this radiant heating. Clara's daily routine was transformed compared to conventional wood heating. She'd wake to cabin temperature of perhaps 58 degrees, cooled overnight as the thermal mass released its last stored heat. She'd build her morning fire in the combustion chamber, 5 pounds of wood, 40 minutes of burning. Then she'd go about her day with no fire tending needed. By afternoon, the cabin would warm to 65 degrees as the thermal mass reached peak heat and radiated strongly. Evening would maintain 60 to 63 degrees. Overnight would gradually cool to 58 by morning. Then repeat. 1 small fire daily. Perhaps 5 pounds of wood, 1/10 of what conventional fireplaces consumed. And superior comfort because the heating was constant and gentle rather than cycling between too hot near the fireplace and too cold away from it. The fuel efficiency was extraordinary. Conventional fireplaces in Montana cabins burned 1 to 2 cords monthly, 16 to 32,000 pounds of wood. Clara's system burned perhaps 150 pounds monthly, 1/10 the consumption, achieving better results. The mathematics were undeniable, but neighbors remained skeptical, certain there must be hidden fires or some trick. The idea that 1 small burn daily could heat through Montana winter violated their understanding of heating. Then January brought the catastrophic cold that proved everything beyond any doubt and revealed the full superiority of thermal mass heating over conventional systems. The cold snap hit January 12th, with warning signs that experienced Montana residents recognized as potentially deadly. Temperature had been hovering around 0 for several days, cold but manageable. Then on January 11th evening, the wind shifted to north. Barometric pressure dropped rapidly and animals behaved strangely. Horses refusing to leave barns, chickens huddling silent, dogs whining at doors. By midnight, January 11th, temperature had dropped to -15 degrees. By dawn, January 12th, -25. By noon, -35. By evening, -40. The drop was sustained and deepening. an Arctic outbreak that would test every structure and heating system to absolute failure points. The wind made conditions catastrophic. 20-mile-per-hour sustained wind at -40 created wind chill approaching -70. Conditions where exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes, where breathing deeply can damage lungs, where being outside means death in 5 minutes or less. Conventional fireplaces throughout Helena began failing immediately under the extreme conditions. The physics were brutal. At -40 exterior and 50 interior, the 90-degree temperature differential meant heat escaped through every gap, every wall surface, every window at catastrophic rates. Conventional fireplaces generated heat continuously but couldn't keep pace with losses. The Morrison family's cabin, conventional fireplace, adequate wood supply, dropped to 45 degrees by evening January 12th, despite burning wood continuously. By January 13th morning, 42 degrees. They were burning half-cord daily and still losing ground. The children wore every piece of clothing they owned indoors and still shivered constantly. The Jensen household was worse. Their large frame house with 3 fireplaces couldn't be heated uniformly. Rooms near fireplaces reached 50 degrees, while distant rooms dropped to 35. They tried concentrating the family in one room with all 3 fireplaces burning into it. The room reached 55 degrees, while consuming wood at rates that would exhaust supplies in a week. By January 13th evening, day 2 of the cold snap with temperature steady at -40, multiple families were in genuine crisis. Wood supplies depleting at unsustainable rates, interior temperatures dropping despite maximum burning, children showing hypothermia symptoms indoors. The community faced the reality that conventional heating couldn't sustain them through prolonged extreme cold. Clara's cabin with the massive thermal battery performed identically to normal operation, completely independent of exterior catastrophe. She maintained her exact routine. Wake at dawn, build small fire in combustion chamber, burn 5 pounds of wood for 45 minutes, let thermal mass absorb and store the heat, go about her day. Nothing changed. Nothing needed to change. The system was designed for this. The 46 tons of thermal mass at 120 degrees contained roughly 5.5 million BTU of stored energy. That energy released over 24 hours provided approximately 230,000 BTU per hour, far more than necessary to overcome heat loss from the well-insulated 320-square-foot cabin even at 90-degree temperature differential. The cabin maintained 60 to 63 degrees through January 12th, 13th and 14th. Clara wore normal indoor clothing, a wool dress, no heavy layers, no coat. She slept under a single blanket comfortably. She cooked meals on her small stove without difficulty. The thermal mass system buffered the exterior catastrophe completely. Word spread through Helena that Clara Whitmore's cabin was somehow staying warm, despite burning almost nothing. People couldn't believe it, assumed there must be hidden fires or some deception. Multiple families visited, seeking to understand what they dismissed as grief-induced insanity. The physics were straightforward. The mass contained approximately 5 million BTU of stored energy, 46 tons at 20 degrees above ambient with Cobb's heat capacity. That energy, released slowly over 24 hours, equaled roughly 230,000 BTU per hour available, more than adequate to overcome heat loss from a 320-square-foot well-insulated cabin. By day 3 of the cold snap, word had spread that Clara Whitmore's cabin was somehow warm despite burning almost nothing. People couldn't believe it. Multiple families visited, desperate and hypothermic, seeking to understand what they'd dismissed as insanity. William Jensen came on day 4, his house at 48 degrees, his children hypothermic, his fires consuming everything available and still losing ground. He knocked on Clara's door, expecting to find her dead or dying. Clara opened the door wearing a light wool dress. not the multiple heavy layers everyone else wore indoors. The cabin behind her was noticeably warm. William entered and stopped completely, his frozen body registering warmth that defied everything he understood. "Your cabin is warm," William said in disbelief. "It's -45 outside. My house is 48 degrees, with 3 fireplaces burning maximum. Your cabin feels like it's 60 degrees. How is this possible?" Clara showed him the system. The sealed conventional fireplace, the small combustion chamber outside, the massive cob structure. Explained the morning fire, 5 pounds of wood, and the thermal mass storing and releasing heat continuously. "You burned 5 pounds of wood this morning," William said slowly, trying to process the mathematics. "I've burned 300 pounds in the last 24 hours. You burned 1/60th what I burned, and you're warmer than my house. This violates everything I understand about heating." "It's not magic," Clara explained. "It's efficiency. Your fireplaces burn wood inefficiently at low temperature, and most heat escapes up chimneys. Mine burns wood completely at high temperature and captures all heat in thermal mass. The mass stores it and releases slowly. One efficient burn beats continuous inefficient burning." "Can my family shelter here?" William asked quietly. "We're genuinely at risk. The children are hypothermic. We've run out of wood we can access safely. Can we shelter in your cabin?" Clara could have refused, could have cited Martha's condescension and community mockery, could have let them suffer consequences of dismissing her innovation. But survival in Montana required community support, and Clara wasn't cruel. "Yes, bring them. There's room." The Jensen family, Martha, William, and 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 11, came to Clara's cabin that evening, carrying the few blankets they could safely transport through -40 conditions. They entered from deadly cold into comfortable warmth and stood confused, their bodies registering conditions their minds couldn't process. The cabin was noticeably warm, perhaps 62 degrees. The Jensen children, Emma, age 6, Thomas, age 8, and Sarah, age 11, had spent 3 days in a 48-degree house, despite 3 fireplaces burning maximum. They'd been cold for so long that actual warmth felt strange and unfamiliar. The 6-year-old Emma approached the shared wall tentatively, drawn by the visible heat waves rising from its surface. She touched it with one finger, pulled back quickly in surprise, then placed her whole palm against it. "Mama, the wall is hot," Emma said with wonder. "There's no fire in this room, but the wall is hot like the stove. How is a wall hot?" Martha touched the wall herself, 8 by 8 feet of smooth cob plaster that was 120 degrees at the surface. She could hold her hand against it for a few seconds before the heat became uncomfortable. The wall was radiating warmth constantly into the cabin space. "There's a fire behind the wall," Thomas, age 8, declared confidently. "That's why it's hot. There's a hidden fire." "There's no fire behind the wall right now," Clara explained. "I built a fire this morning at dawn, burned wood for about 45 minutes. The fire heated the mass behind this wall, 46 tons of clay and stone. That mass is releasing the stored heat now, 12 hours after the fire stopped." "Stored heat?" Sarah, age 11, asked, the oldest child and most curious. "Heat can be stored, like storing water in a barrel?" "Exactly like that," Clara said. "Water stores in a barrel until you need it. Heat stores in thermal mass until you need it. The mass behind this wall is like a barrel full of heat that slowly empties over 24 hours. Tomorrow morning I'll fill it again with another small fire." The concept fascinated the children more than the adults. Children accepted that heat could be stored without needing to understand all the physics. Adults struggled because it violated their experience that heat required continuous fire. The Jensen family slept on blankets on Clara's floor that night, 6 people in the 320-square-foot space. The children fell asleep touching the warm wall, experiencing comfort they'd never known in Montana January. Martha and William lay awake, processing the reality that Clara's insane system worked better than anything they'd considered possible. The next morning demonstrated the routine that sustained the system. Clara woke before dawn, dressed in light clothing, just a wool dress, no heavy layers, and went outside to the combustion chamber. The Jensen family watched through the window as she loaded wood. Small sticks, perhaps 1 inch diameter, 1 armful total, into the tiny firebox. She lit the fire and partially closed the chamber door, controlling airflow. Within minutes, the fire was burning intensely. They could see through gaps in the structure that the interior was glowing bright orange from the extreme temperature. Minimal smoke emerged from the chimney, evidence of complete combustion rather than the heavy smoke of conventional fires. After 45 minutes, Clara closed the chamber completely, cutting off air. The fire died within minutes, having consumed the small fuel load completely. She returned inside, where the Jensen family was staring in disbelief. "That's it?" William asked. "That's your fire for the day? 5 pounds of wood? My house burns 200 pounds daily and can't stay above 48 degrees. You burn 5 pounds and maintain 62 degrees. The mathematics make no sense." "Your fireplaces waste 80% of heat up chimneys," Clara explained again. "Mine captures 90% in thermal mass. I burn 1/10 the fuel, but capture 4 times the heat per pound. The result is I use 1/40th the fuel for better results." Over the 4 days the Jensen family stayed, they watched the cycle repeat. Morning fire, 45 minutes. Thermal mass gradually warming through morning and afternoon. Evening, comfortable and warm. Night, gradually cooling but never cold. Morning repeat. The children became obsessed with the warm wall. They'd press their faces against it, feeling the radiant heat. They'd place hands on it and time how long they could hold them there before the 120-degree temperature became uncomfortable, usually 15 to 20 seconds. They'd ask Clara repeatedly to explain how heat could be stored and released. The Jensen family stayed 4 days until the cold snap broke. Experienced comfort they'd never known in Montana winter. Watched Clara's morning routine. 1 small fire, 45 minutes, then nothing until next morning. Watched the cabin maintain comfortable temperature continuously from that single burn. When temperature rose to -10 on January 18th and they returned to their own house, Martha Jensen understood she'd been completely wrong. The structure she called insane was actually revolutionary engineering. The woman she'd tried to rescue had solved a problem everyone else accepted as unsolvable. Within 3 weeks, William Jensen had hired Clara as consultant to design a thermal mass heating system for their house. By spring 1888, 4 families in Helena had commissioned Clara to build systems using her principles. Clara's work became her livelihood and purpose. The grief never fully healed, but the work focused her. She'd spend days building massive cob structures, teaching families how to operate high-efficiency combustion chambers, explaining thermal mass principles to skeptical men who'd never considered a widow might understand heating better than they did. By 1890, 15 buildings in Helena region had Clara Whitmore thermal mass heaters. Fuel consumption in those buildings dropped by 80 to 90%, while comfort improved dramatically. The innovation spread gradually through Montana territory as practical results overcame skepticism. Clara remarried in 1891 at age 32 to a carpenter who appreciated her engineering mind and helped build systems more efficiently. They had 2 children and lived comfortably in a house heated by a thermal mass system that required perhaps 200 pounds of wood annually, 1/50th what conventional houses consumed. Clara lived until 1943, dying at age 84. Her obituary mentioned her thermal mass heating innovation that had transformed Montana winter survival. The insane decision to brick up a woodshed had actually been the beginning of viable winter heating. The original system in her cabin was preserved as historical demonstration. Modern thermal analysis confirmed the efficiency. Combustion chamber achieving 92% heat transfer to thermal mass versus 15 to 25% efficiency in conventional fireplaces. One small fire providing 24 hours heat through thermal storage rather than continuous wasteful burning. The story is about a widow who understood that storing heat is more efficient than generating it continuously, who recognized that massive thermal mass could buffer temperature extremes and provide constant gentle warmth, who proved that one handful of firewood burned efficiently and stored properly could heat through Montana winter better than half cord burned wastefully. Because sometimes the person who bricks up the woodshed understands thermodynamics better than everyone else. The massive structure everyone called insane was actually perfect physics, and one efficient fire beats continuous inefficient burning when you understand thermal mass storage.